Hello, business innovators and educators. You're listening to The Enterprise Learning Architect. I'm your host, Chris Knotts, here to guide you through practices and ideas you can use to help build a culture of learning in your organization. Stay tuned to power up your professional playbook as we have conversations with exceptional people who share their experience in achieving successful learning outcomes. Ready to innovate, educate, and iterate? Let's do it. Welcome back to the Enterprise Learning Pod, where we innovate, educate, and iterate our way to better enterprise learning outcomes. Joining us this week is Shane Hastie. For many, Shane will need no introduction. He's a well-known technology team coach, a seasoned training facilitator, an agile product development expert, and he currently serves as global delivery lead at SoftEd. Shane champions humanistic ways of working and agile practices worldwide. Today, Shane and I discussed the training from the back of the room approach developed by Sharon Bowman. TBR is a training approach which reimagines traditional classroom delivery by using brain-based and cognitive science principles to more actively engage learners and ensure lasting learning. Shane explains how TBR can make conventional corporate training more effective and more enjoyable for learners. Tune in as we explore this innovative approach to enterprise training and get a chance to access methods that have proven successful for Shane in his own learning delivery career. Enjoy. All right, we've got Shane Hastie. Shane, thank you very much for joining the ELA pod.
Chris, thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
It's
my
great to be
goodness,
here.
such a pleasure. I'm so excited about this. So, we are here to discuss, I think, a very cool topic and one that I've been learning a little more about. But before we get into that, we often don't do this because obviously folks will have heard the intro that I record for you before we go to the live segment. But I think just because of your background and the experience you've got under your belt, it's worth me maybe just taking a moment because I think it's actually very interesting. Just tell us a little about yourself. You know, we don't normally spend time at the beginning of the interview doing that, but I think it's worth spending a
Oh,
few minutes on. So if you don't mind,
oh.
where I'm coming from, and we're obviously both in sort of enterprise technology education and things like that. But you've done a lot of different
Mm.
things, and I just, I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes, and the floor is yours. Tell us a little
Oh
bit
boy.
about some of the things you've done.
Who is Shane Hastie? What have I done? I've been in information technology for I discovered the other day it is 4 decades, which is sometimes a bit scary to think about. So I've been involved literally from the early 80s writing COBOL and assembler programmers programs on IBM mainframes. I did program on paper tape and punch cards, but got over that as quickly as I possibly could. Um, Ended up, I'm a New Zealander by birth, but I spent many years living in Africa and South Africa mainly. Um, got Worked in financial institutions and started my own business. Ended up being specializing in airline systems, small to medium sized airline back office systems that we sold to companies all around Africa. So I spent a lot of time traveling to airports that shouldn't really be there and aeroplanes that shouldn't have really been in the air. But it was fun, and I learned a tremendous amount. I think we made a difference in the work that we were doing. Had a business with a strong social conscience. That's always been a big part of my life is making a difference in the lives of other people. Uh, Came back to New Zealand in 1996. Worked for a company again in the building software realm. Um, Doing a lot of work at that stage internationally. Traveled a lot to the US, to Australia, to bits of Asia. Um, Building custom-made facilities and property management systems, implementing those. Uh, Made some tremendous mistakes. There's a few projects in that era when I look back on and go, "Oh no, how could I have done that? How could I have been so I want to say naive, so lacking in understanding. A lot of cross-cultural mistakes I made at that stage. And then I joined SoftEd, uh, looking for a very a shift. Again, part of the making a difference in other people's lives, moving into into teaching what I had been doing. Project management, business analysis, requirements engineering, all the development practices. And I was incredibly fortunate that this was right at the beginning of the Agile movement. And I got SoftEd at the time was used to run conferences, and we would bring people like Jim Highsmith and Alistair Coburn and Johanna Rothman, Ellen Gottesdiener, a lot of the folks who were establishing the beginning of that Agile movement. And I got to learn about it at sitting at the feet of the greats, so to speak. When we would bring them out for conferences, we would often do master classes with them as well. And we also looked after them at a social level. You've got somebody come out from, uh, they've come from the US to New Zealand. They're going to be here for a week or two. So I got to spend a lot of social time sitting down talking about, I remember conversations with Jim Highsmith talking about what actually happened in the Snowbird meeting. And Sanjeev Augustine talking about why he wrote his first book on agile project management, and getting those ideas right from the source, so to speak. And that inspired me to get involved with the agile movement. I ended up on the board of the Agile Alliance globally for 5 years, and that was again a wonderful opportunity. Taught me more about leadership. During my time on the board, Rebecca Parsons was the chair of the board for most of that period. And I learned more about leadership from her than I have from anyone else ever in my career. And it was phenomenal and wonderful to be part of that. Along the way, I got inspired to also write books. I've written a couple. Not on my own, always with collaborators. The first one, Evan Laybourne and I wrote the Hash No Projects book, which was published in 2017. We published that through InfoQ. I've also had a very long association with InfoQ. I'm the lead editor for culture and methods on InfoQ.com. Look after the side of the InfoQ publishing that is about the people side of software engineering. Jerry Weinberg makes the point that whatever your problem is, it's never a technology problem. It's always a people problem. And if you think it's a technology problem, it's a people problem. So understanding the people side of software engineering, and that's again what I brought into the work that I do at SoftEd. SoftEd now part of Skills Group, and I spent 5 years. They called it my sabbatical. I went away and joined IC Agile for 5 years. So I've looked at the certification space and been part of that community. And yeah, back at SoftEd now, and I think they now call me the global delivery lead.
That is what they call you. Yes. So quite a journey. Thanks for that. That's perfect. I just think that it's worth a few minutes, because even as you tell a little bit about your story, we can start to get some insights into some points of value that our audience might appreciate. And so I'm glad to hear about that. And so from that backstory, I think that what I'd like to do here is we will first jump forwards immediately to the topic, but then I will forewarn everyone that I may take some tributaries back along to unpack some of the things you mentioned, because I think there are some interesting things there. And of course, I'm realizing I'll have to discipline myself to keep us on topic, because there's actually a lot of interesting things that we could talk about, and I'd love to. I have a lot of questions, but with that. Let's talk about what we're actually ostensibly here to address, although I do hope we have time for some of those tributaries. So,
Sure.
we are, of course, obviously an enterprise learning program here. And you're an influential character when we talk about it's relatively recent, come along a few years ago. It's been a trend in the world of enterprise technology training. A practice called training from the back of the room, or TBR, which we may refer to it as henceforth.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I'll let you explain it in depth, but I'll just say right out of the gate that a TBR is a set of practices which is designed to really engage learners in a learning setting, in a classroom setting. And this is an urgent need in the world of training and learning right now. We still see way too much death by PowerPoint. As you know, I've been guilty of this myself, but from a learning effectiveness standpoint, we know that we need immersive experiences, we need engagement, we need back and forth. People really learn best when they are actually implementing, practicing, asking questions, getting curious, um, lighting the fire, as it were, so that when they leave the classroom or the learning engagement, they are stimulated to go and learn more on their own, things like that. These are the keys to good learning outcomes that we're really interested in. So, training from the back of the room, that's our topic for today. And maybe we'll get back to a few of these other tertiary things in a moment. But let me kick it back to you and just have you tell us, in your own
Hmm.
words, explain to us what is TBR. Tell us why it's important, and just kind of help us understand TBR a little bit in general.
So, training from the back of the room comes from work by Sharon Bowman. She wrote the book, Training from the Back of the Room. And what she did was distill down the brain science of not just adult learning, but human learning. So initially it was adult learning, and then we figured out that actually children and adults learn in the same way. So human learning. She tapped into all of the research and took that research and turned it into a set of practical, pragmatic techniques, tools, and advice for instructional design and course delivery. So the her work was largely in the non technology education space. But definitely in adult education. And then a number of the instructors in the Agile community picked up on it, and it's become almost the de facto standard for Agile training approaches now, because it does. The concepts are relatively straightforward. She has a set of what she calls six trumps, six fundamental brain science principles, which again she put into a book called Brain Science: The Art of Making Training Sick. And those six trumps are things that you can apply in your instructional design and in your delivery. So the first one, movement, trumps sitting. How many times, if we think of the classroom environment, you sit for 6 to 8 hours? Your brain is not getting enough oxygen. So how can we incorporate movement into that? Even if we're in the remote environment, how can you incorporate movement as part of the interaction with your participant? The second one, talking trumps listening. She has an adage that conveys through all of her guidance: is the person doing the most talking about a topic is the one doing the most learning. And yet, our instructional approach is the sage on the stage, standing there lecturing at people. Um, how can I engage my learners to think for themselves, to ask questions, to have the conversation? One of the things about adult learning in particular is we come to our classroom with experience. We're not, yes, the instructor has got probably more knowledge about the topic than than the participants, but they bring knowledge and experience with them. They're not coming with that absolutely clean slate. So tapping into that, giving the opportunity to talk and communicate, to have conversations rather than a monologue. The third one, images trump words. And this again, it's drawing on the brain science. Our brains remember and hone in on interesting images. They don't, they get bored very quickly. And words, the 7 bullet points, 7 lines, PowerPoints. If you actually, and they've measured this in brain science and research and so forth, we switch off. If you've got the third slide that looks similar with the 7 bullet points and walls of text, we don't notice the difference anymore. The writing trumps reading. So how, again, can I engage my participants to actually to write something down? And what that's looking at is the way the neural pathways in our mind work, in our brains work when you write versus when you listen to something and when you read something. It opens up different pathways. Shorter over longer. Our attention span is, if we're lucky, 10 minutes. And yet we sit in a lecture theatre for 60 minutes. And you might remember the first 5 and the last 2, and everything in the middle is blurred. And then different trumps same. How do we shift things up? And this is a horrifying thing for the marketing department who want the template PowerPoint. Because by the time we've shown that third slide with the same template and the same layout, people stop noticing the difference. So how do we interject difference into the education, into the content that we're delivering? So that's the one side of what training from the back of the room is bringing. It's these 6 trumps, these 6 brain science principles. And then there's all sorts of different techniques that you can bring into it and apply to leverage these techniques. And I've spoken for at least 7 minutes, so I should stop.
No, that's great. I love all of these concepts, and when I hear you describe them, they make so much sense. They sound so fundamental, but then when I think about the typical training experiences as I've seen them, they are not following those those trumps. Um, we had an earlier
Yeah.
conversation, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately. The brain science angle that you mentioned. Um, you know, we were thinking about how to make learning experiences more engaging by following the lead a little bit of some of these app developers. And we know these app developers are they have no qualms about calling in the best psychologists and neuroscientists to try to understand how does the brain work and how can I use that mechanism to keep you on my app longer, right? And so it's all about attention,
Hmm.
and it's all about the reward
Hmm.
centers. And so it sounds kind of
Hmm.
sleazy sometimes when we think about that, but from a pedagogical standpoint, we're really interested in designing a learning experience in a way that leverages that type of brain science, leverages those reward centers for the learner's benefit. And that's what that's all about. So I think that's very cool. But I think your overview was fantastic. The Trump concepts I think, are very interesting. Now, you alluded to something. You mentioned only half of it, and I want to get you to talk a little bit about the other half,
Mm-hmm.
the sage on the stage, right? The
Mm-hmm.
experienced subject matter expert who's up there in front of a class delivering one-sided lecture with walls of text on a PowerPoint deck. Now, I'll go ahead and say this, and then you can talk about it. But you say that in TBR, they talk about transitioning from the sage on the sage to the guide on the side. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, that's going to be the title
Mm-hmm.
of this episode once we get it all produced. But in the context of those trumps that you described, and in the context of thinking
Mm-hmm.
about things just from a brain science standpoint, tell us about that. Tell us about how a facilitator or a subject matter expert can transition themselves from being this sage on the stage to the guide on the side, and how that kind of ties into all of the fundamental conceptual framework around TBR.
Mm-hmm. So when you're an instructor, when you're an instructional designer, you have a lot of knowledge of a topic. And there's a desire to pump that knowledge into other people's heads. That's what we want to do. And this leads us to the temptation of I have to stand up and I've got to tell them everything, and I've got to tell them uh, all of it, and I've got to convey it, and they've got to listen to me, and and it will bring it in. The reality is it's taken you 5, 10, 15, 20 years to learn that everything. No matter who is in your class, they will not be able to take it all in a 2-day experience or a half day, or however, whatever your
It's
time
such
period
a good
is.
point. Sorry to interrupt. But like
So,
when we do our training development, that's a big selling point for us, right? It's 1 day, it's 2 days, and we're going to send you back to work right away. So we're always focused on really, like, relatively short form deliveries. That's a great point. You're never
yeah,
going to download all of the experience that a subject matter expert has in 20 years in a 1 or 2 day class.
yeah, yeah. There's a model of skills development 70-20-10. 10% of what you learn will happen in the classroom. 20% will be guidance by a peer or a mentor, but 70% is just going to be doing the work. So if I recognize that, then I can let go of I have to tell you everything, to what is the 10% that you can come away from that will be the basis of your being able to learn. Sharon puts it as teach only the need to know, but make sure that your learners have access to the other stuff when they need it. So take a topic, give them just enough to be able to practice this, to be able to do it. Let them do it. Let them experience it. Let them reflect on that doing, because that's actually when the learning happens. And then they can take that away and give them the reference material. So if in the training from the back of the room training, you come away with 3 books. You have the workbook, which is not nice and sequential, and we do terrible things like tearing pages out, and all sorts of jarring things happen in there. And you have 2 textbooks. In the class, we will spend 20 minutes maybe looking at the 2 textbooks. We're not going to be referencing them, but you will know enough to have looked at the table of contents to know that there is a technique for doing a myth or fact activity. I know that there's such a thing. So if I want to reinforce some learning, myth or fact is a good tool for that. Thumbs up, thumbs down, to engage your participants. Where do I find it? Well, I know it's in the book. That's all I need to know. I don't need to know exactly how it works, because when I need it, I know it's in the book. I
Hmm.
can then go and reference it. So teaching just the need to know, the just enough, and then trusting that the participant can go away and access that content afterwards. So it's not just it. I don't have to tell them every little jot and tittle of the technique of the content. But what is the minimum? Yeah, I'm going to use the horrible term. What's the minimum viable product? What's the minimum amount needed to enable them to be effective? And the other side of TBR is the structure, the instructional design component there, and that has Sharon talks about the four C's. We start with any topic. We start with a connection activity, and most often this is a question. I don't start and lecture. I start and say, what do you
Hmm.
already know about this topic? In the requirements class I'm teaching this week, our opening question was, what are the biggest challenges you and your teams have with the requirements? And that was a half-hour conversation that I might
Hmm.
have said 20 words.
So when we talk about like the holy
Because
grail of learning engagement, which is this idea of kind of like igniting
mm,
curiosity, um, creating a
mm,
perpetuating machine so that people's minds have the desire to go and learn. This sounds like it's very much oriented around that, and maybe even is I might go so far as to say actually kind of a practical technique uh, to encourage that, right? Because for one thing, you've given them
yeah,
further reference, and you've made them aware that there's a tool or something there that might come in useful for them, but you're not spending the classroom time on that. You're giving them the bare minimum, making sure they have what they need, making sure they understand kind of why and when it may be useful or important, and then stimulating conversation, which who knows? I mean, there's any number of unknown things that might come up when you're with a group
mm,
of peers in a classroom. Probably the situations contextually that their peers face are probably way more interesting than any canned content that that we could talk about.
mm,
Right? Do I have that right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And what it is not, though, is an excuse for the
Mm,
instructor to sit back. So if you've got a theory component you know needs to be conveyed, have the conversation, ask the questions, and then you've got to listen really carefully. Has the conversation that the participants have had given them the topic knowledge that they need? If not, then you need to step in and say, and here is a bit of theory. Here is something. But if they've covered the topic and it's covered adequately, you can say, well, I don't need to teach you this
mm,
topic. We can move on to the next one. So the instructor has to be very, very on the ball in that classroom environment. It's not a case of, yeah, the participants are having a conversation. I can do my
hmm.
email on the sides. It's I'm aware of what's going on, whether that's in the in-person class, I'm wandering around in the class, where in the remote class, where people are often put out into small breakout rooms. Well, I'm moving between those breakout rooms. I've let them know I'll be coming in and out. I'm listening. I'm and then when we come back, I'm asking for, okay, what came out about this and what came out about that, and we're again prepared to fill in the small gap, rather than I've got 20 bullet points on a slide that I've got to make sure they've all been covered. Well, yeah, 17 of them got
Hmm.
covered in the conversations. Here are the three that you didn't touch on.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and
So
it
adapting
sounds
that.
like in our coaching classes, we kind of talk about the various levels of it's almost, I guess, situational awareness. When you're coaching someone, And it
Yeah.
takes practice, doesn't it, to expand your sphere of awareness.
Hmm.
You're having a conversation with someone, you're coaching
Yeah.
someone, and it's instinctual. You're going to be very attuned just to what they're saying, or maybe even just to what you yourself are saying. And so, in order to be an effective coach, you have to develop tiers of awareness so that you're aware of what's going on inside your own mind. You're aware of the objective of the interaction, but you're also aware of what they're saying and where they are with things. And then as you become practiced, you're actually aware of the room, the environment, things that may serendipitously just kind of crop up, which may be able to be used as uh, relevant or objects that could be brought in. That's just what you reminded me of when you were talking about that. That practice, that level of elevation in terms of how aware you are. And you have to be able to do that while not becoming distracted from what the learner is about or saying at that moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The reality is both the instructional design and the delivery are more demanding on the instructor. Because if my instructional design is just copy the things that I would put in a text box onto a set of PowerPoint slides, uh,
Mm.
honestly, that's lazy. But all too often, that's
Hmm.
exactly what we see. Whereas if I'm designing for a training from the back of the room class, I've got to think about the logical sequence. Sharon provides some guidance in terms of a structure. I talked to the first one, the C1, the connection at the beginning of any learning block, where you're connecting the learners to the topic and to each other. What do you already know about this? What do they bring to the table? What are they curious about on this topic? Then the C2 is the concept. Yeah, there is some theoretical learning that you need to provide. Well, what is the base concepts that we have for this? And then the C3 is the concrete practice. Put that into practice now. And the fourth part of that, and this is where actually the learning locks in, is the conclusion. So now that you've seen, we started off talking about this topic, what you already know about it. I've given you some theory. You put it into practice. What does this mean to you in the wild? How are you going to use this? What will you do with this new knowledge? That's the point where the learning actually happens. And the learner is the one who is active at that point. But I have to design my content into these blocks of 4C modules. And I've got to think about what are the activities that will happen at each point. How will I engage? What are the techniques? Now, in Sharon's book, Training from the Back of the Room, there are 65 different specific techniques that can be used and applied. And the class where we teach training from the back of the room, we apply those techniques. We use it to teach it. We use the six trumps, we use the 4Cs, and then we make it visible. So we do something, then we step up and say, look, in terms of the learning, this is what we've just done. So that going meta to teach TBR is really important as well, so that the participants can then see for themselves. And often in other classes where I'm using TBR techniques, I will also frequently pause and ask people, okay, let's step above the activity and think about what was happening here, and this ability to go meta, to look down on, actually is really important in cementing and embedding that learning.
Yeah, it's not always easy to think of things from sort of that meta dimension, which is it's quite a different
Mm.
mindset, really, and it's just a, I mean, it's meta, right? It's a completely different layer of thinking.
Yeah.
But I love the point, and it's
Mm.
quite an interesting one about the instructional design. Yes, you have to have a much more sophisticated approach, because instead of just thinking about, okay, let me bucket up all my knowledge, put it into a slide deck, deliver it, download the stuff, like you were talking about a few minutes ago, you're sort of having to think about how to create a situation, aren't you? But you're not just creating a
Mm-hmm.
situation from an abstract point. You have to have the learning outcomes be achieved. So you have to make sure that that
Mm-hmm.
situation is created in such a way that there's a path to the learning objectives, just as you might have learning objectives established with a conventional class. And I can see how that would be, yeah, it's just
Yeah.
more of a challenge. It's a more sophisticated level of ID,
Mm.
isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. The reality is that designing these classes is it's harder work, and you've really got, and this is again where you've really got to know your topic, and you have to then be able to distill into, okay, what is the just enough, what is that small piece that is going to enable them to do the practice, to embed the learning, and oh, by the way, here's the rest. You can find the rest when you need it, and in the classroom is not when you need it, it's when you're out doing. But in the classroom, I'm giving you enough to know to go and look for it.
So this touches on something that I was very curious to ask you about. So when I'm thinking about
Mm.
training as a product, or a learning experience as a product,
Mhm.
which has been obviously my whole career and a great deal of yours, I kind of think about there's there's a few different buckets of not
Mhm.
exactly modality, but sort of the type of things that you may address in a training environment. And if you're not
Mhm.
involved in designing training or you're not in a training domain, you may not think about this. People will
Mhm.
generalize and think, oh, well, training's because people want to earn a certification, or they need to learn how to do some very specific thing. But I've thought a lot about this, and it strikes me that there's probably more,
Mhm.
but let's just say there's four main buckets, and you can check me on this, and I'm happy for your feedback. But the first
Mhm.
bucket, I think, would be knowledge, right? So knowledge has its place.
Mhm.
It's important. But knowledge can be quite theoretical. This can definitely lead us to this wall of
Mhm.
text, to the one-sided delivery, things like that. But knowledge nonetheless plays a key role sometimes, and it's an important ingredient to have kind of in the pantry, as you will. And people want the
Mhm.
knowledge as they need it and the dose that they need it. But that's one bucket. And then we have a second bucket, which is what I think of as kind of as skills, right? Now, skills is a completely different thing.
Mhm.
Skills certainly requires some knowledge, but it's a completely different focus. And I think about this a lot in terms of tool training. You have a new
Mhm.
IT product, and that needs to be integrated with your platform, or you're automating something. You and I've been engaged recently on a lot of AI training. That's a tool. So there's a skills component
Mhm.
there, and that really gets to that. This is practical. It's what you're going to be able to do. When this class is
Mhm.
over, you're going to be able to go back and do this new thing. Skills is important for training, right? And then there's a third bucket, which I kind of think of as it's a little different, but training, having people together in a learning experience or classroom, it can be quite useful for other things aside from skills and knowledge, such as, for instance, I'm thinking of like establishing alignment, right? Like getting people into a room, um,
Mhm.
uh, you know, uh, working through with a group of executives or leaders or something like that. It's very much a two-way in that situation. The last thing you want to do in a situation like that is deliver some kind of one-sided, uh, wall of text, theoretical knowledge. That's very participatory. I mean, I almost feel like training is almost a bad
Mhm.
term for it. I like to use words like workshop and things like that. Because it's a
Mhm.
round table experience, but there's a work product there that you're trying to get out of it, and that work product really is alignment so that you can move forward on the initiative. um, and then the fourth one that I think about a lot is just really it's not about individuals taking away new skills or new knowledge or something like that.
Mhm.
It's more about using training as a vehicle so that you can do something that's very important from an organizational level, which is like baselining people, establishing
Mhm.
common nomenclature, establishing expectations. There's this. It's a socialization thing, really. And again, I mean, I think that it is a training thing sometimes, but the training is not about equipping them with some kind of new job skill or delivering them with new knowledge. It's about an organic establishment of common shared expectations, a shared understanding. It's a shared thing that you're trying to deliver. So you're using training as the vehicle to implement something that's important at an organizational level, not necessarily an individual level, such as learning a new skill or earning a new certification or something like that. So, and I'm sure there's others, but those four are the ones I've been thinking about a lot lately. Training, common modality for doing all those, but it's four very different things. So with that, two
Mm.
questions. Number one, feel free to check me on that. I'm curious for your feedback. But number two, how would you approach those four different objectives? Common modality of training, four different objectives, but viewed through the TBR lens. Do you think TBR would be equally applicable to all of those, or would it be applicable for one more than another? That's something I was really curious to ask you about.
Cool. All
I
right,
did
cool.
say
There's
a
a
lot.
lot
I'm
there.
sorry about that.
The f- the four intents of a learning experience. So knowledge and theory. One of the first questions I would ask is why. Why do my participants want to get this knowledge? Is it they have to have this knowledge in order to be compliant? So, how many of us have done cybersecurity training in our
Awareness training. Yeah.
organizations? Which
Yeah.
awareness training? I'm sorry, it doesn't work. We've ticked the box. I can certainly apply a TBR approach, but I need to go right back to the why. What is in it for the learner? And then I want to look at how can we make this as engaging and useful as possible. And I have to be honest with the learner. This is why you're here. Um, in order for our organization to be compliant with this piece of legislation, you have to go through this. Here are some new knowledge you have to acquire. The value of this knowledge is, and now I can start to have a contextual conversation. So it's not just, yeah, okay, I'm going to know the 7 rules of our cybersecurity. Well, no, I will know that when something looks like a phishing email, I'll be able to protect myself and our organization from it. So I can shift that from the compliant to this knowledge is valuable to me. And that's the most important thing. If I want participant engagement, the knowledge has to be valuable to the participant. If you want pure compliance, yeah, just make them go and swat something and do an exam. It's but if you actually want engagement and activation of that knowledge in that context should always have an activation component to it. And I can certainly use the TBR structures to make that learning experience more engaging and more effective. The skills training, that's where TBR came out of. It really is about how do we make um, this acquisition of skills really, really useful, effective,
Yeah.
and
Get them
persistent.
doing. That's the number one thing to build skills.
Get
Yeah.
them doing. Absolutely. You know, see
Mm.
one, do one, teach one. All of this, get them doing it, and in the TBR context, the C3, the concrete practice, they can do the practice or they can teach somebody in the practice. The third one that you talk about, that alignment, the workshop, and I'm glad you used the term workshop there. If we think about a workshop versus a meeting, a workshop is a collaborative activity in which a group of people get some work done, versus a meeting is a collaborative activity in which a group of people make work for other
Yes.
people. Meetings have task assignments, and it's almost always people who are not there. But a workshop is this collaborative activity. There may have to be a learning component. So if we're going to apply a technique in a workshop, and this is where you can bring in the TBR components. So there is a new skill that these people need to acquire, or a small piece of skill that these people need to acquire, so they can now do the workshop. Now we've got the added value of, I'm going to learn something new that is useful to me, and I'm going to apply it and use it there and then. I've done business analysis training for an organization where we spread the course, which was typically a 3-day in-person event. We spread it to 2 months, and we used a real world project that this organization was doing. And at the beginning of every session, we would teach a technique, and then we would workshop that technique with this project. So they were doing stuff that was of value to the organization, and learning the new technique and applying that technique in depth. So by the end of the initiative, by the end of that little project, the people who were on that team had learned the new knowledge, exhibited the skill, and delivered something of
And
value
yeah,
to the
this
organization.
this is a
So there was that
modality. This is a
three
modality that
layer.
I've really tried to prioritize over the last few years in deeper engagements, because it's kind of an everybody wins type
Yeah.
of situation. You know,
Yeah.
the employer, and rather than having to take people off the job and sit them in a classroom, they're actually getting the work done, getting it done better. The learner is learning in the best way possible because they're actually applying and doing, and they're doing it in their own context. And then of course the coach or the facilitator is getting the best possible learning outcome. So it's always been quite a strong selling point, I think,
Yeah.
as far as for someone who's providing
Yeah.
upskilling.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I know you have one more still to go, but
Yeah.
I just the way you described
Yeah.
that format is very close to my heart because
Mm.
it's
Oh,
on the job.
it's an
Yeah,
incredibly
yeah.
powerful format. Yeah. Wonderfully powerful format. And but we can shorten that to that workshop where that we're creating that alignment, the team formation, and so forth. So as the facilitator and coach, you're conscious of, there's a small portion of learning that needs to happen here, but most of it, or of teaching, but most of this is about the people learning how to work together effectively. And I'm creating the frame. Then that last one, the building a common language, socialization, I would want to do that with almost
Hmm.
no teaching. I want to hold the space, and this is the facilitator role, and have the participants come up
Hmm.
with the content because they are experts in their own environment. So I'm not imposing this from outside. If we're talking about building this common language, I don't want to give them the language. I want them to come up with the language. I will set up a series of questions. I won't do a teach. They will figure out how to teach themselves. And this might be in an open space event, or it could be just in that collaborative workshop environment. But as the facilitator, I'm holding the space. I'm not, and I might give them an agenda. Here are the some key topics that we need to work through, and maybe some suggested techniques. You could use a 1-2-4 all from liberating structures, or other techniques to explore this topic and come up with. But we give them goals, and we give them a frame, because we're working with responsible adults who are professionals in their roles. Let's tap into that knowledge and
I
profession.
love that, and it's so well described the way you break it down. But the idea conventionally that it's the subject matter expert who's the heart of the product from a learning
Mm,
product standpoint. But
yeah,
in actuality, we're treating the people in the room as they're the subject matter experts, right? And that, of course, that aligns with so much
yeah,
of what I mean. I know you and I at least are aligned on it, but this idea the people that are
mm,
closest to the work are the best informed about the work. And so just going ahead and
yeah,
taking one more step and saying that makes you the expert, not me. Now, of course, it's a different type of expert to
yeah,
do a good job facilitating that, building that frame, and so forth. But I think these are the type of differences. It might seem nuanced, although it's actually not really all that nuanced. It's very particular
mm,
lanes of learning experience. But I think this is exactly the conversation I was hoping to have in terms of kind of defining the anatomy of different learning breakdowns. Um, I have a lot of other questions I could ask you. We're coming to the end of our time, so I hope you let us pester you and have you back
mm.
sometime. But I think this has been a
Anytime.
great overview of TBR, which was the main thing for today. So I appreciate that.
Mm,
We will plug. Your books and SoftEd, and I should say, I do some work for SoftEd as well, particularly around the AI
mm.
for job role enablement, which is a very fun, exciting thing. I've really enjoyed working with you guys on that. But I give you the last word. In the show notes, folks can check out your books. We'll plug SoftEd, and we'll have all that information in the notes. But we'll give you the last word. Just whether it's TBR or anything else you'd like to share. What would you leave us with? Advice or anything? Surprise us.
Whew. uh, be kind to each other. Give ourselves grace and mercy. There's a lot of pressure that we're sitting under in organizations today and in the world around us. Change is happening fast. Just take the time to pause and be kind.
Yes, perfect. Nothing to add. So, Shane, thank you. You've been very generous to give us this hour, and of course, I'll see you in future work. But we appreciate it, and we will catch you next time. Thanks so much.
Chris, thank you so much for
Good.
having me. It was fun.